What made these places matter wasn't just what they sold, but how they made you feel. Because back then, childhood wasn't lived through screens. It was lived through places. Real places. Places you could walk into, look around, and lose track of time without even realizing it. These brands weren't just part of the high street, they were part of growing up. They shaped the rhythm of everyday life. A Saturday morning trip into town. A Friday night ritual the whole family looked forward to. A quiet moment flipping through pages, imagining what you might ask for next. And maybe that's why we remember them the way we do. Not because they were perfect, but because they were part of a life that felt slower, simpler, and somehow more real. So this isn't just a story about businesses that failed. It's about something we lost without realizing it. Here are 10 brands that didn't just vanish, but took a piece of childhood with them. Number 1, Woolworths. Every British childhood started here. You could spot it before you even saw the sign. The bright windows. The hum of people moving in and out. And inside, a world that didn't feel like a shop at all. It felt like possibility. At Woolworths, you never really went in for one thing, you went in for everything. Or sometimes, for nothing at all. Just to wander. Just to look. Just to feel that quiet excitement of not knowing what you might find. There was the pick and amp, mix counter, rows of colors, shapes, and choices that somehow felt bigger than they were. You'd stand there longer than you needed to, carefully deciding, as if it mattered more than anything else that day. And then the toys. Shelves that felt endless when you were small. Boxes you'd turn over, imagining what it would be like to take one home. Even if you didn't, it didn't matter. Being there was enough. For many families, this was part of the routine. A stop on a Saturday. A small reward. A shared moment that didn't need to be planned. It wasn't just a shop. It was a feeling. But over time, that feeling began to fade. The high street changed. Shopping became faster. More efficient. More forgettable. And in 2009, Woolworths closed its doors for the last time. No single moment marked the end. No dramatic goodbye. Just shutters coming down and staying down. And suddenly, something familiar was gone. Not just the sweets. Not just the shelves. But the experience of walking in without a purpose and leaving with something more than you expected. Because places like this didn't just sell things. They gave you small moments that quietly became part of who you were. And when they disappeared, they took those moments with them. And it wouldn't be the last. Number 2, Blockbuster. Friday nights had a ritual, and it started here. There was something different about the end of the week. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet kind of excitement that built throughout the day. Because Friday night meant one thing, choosing a film. And for many families, that meant a trip to Blockbuster. You'd walk through those doors and be met with rows upon rows of cases. Bright covers. Familiar faces. Stories waiting to be picked. But the choice wasn't instant, it was part of the experience. You walked slowly. You scanned the shelves. You picked something up, then put it back. Sometimes you couldn't agree. Sometimes the best films were already gone. And somehow, that made it better. Because this wasn't just about watching a film, it was about choosing it together. That moment mattered. Parents, children, everyone involved in a small decision that felt bigger than it really was. And once the choice was made, the night had a shape. A beginning, a middle, an end. No scrolling. No algorithms. Just a shared moment, created in real time. But like so many things, it didn't last. Technology changed. Convenience took over. And gradually, the ritual disappeared. Streaming made everything instant. Endless options available at any time. No need to leave the house. No need to wait. And one by one, stores like Blockbuster began to close. There was no single moment when it ended. Just fewer visits, shorter queues, darker windows. Until eventually, the lights went out. Now, the choice is endless. But the feeling is gone. Because what we lost wasn't just a place to rent films. It was the act of choosing together. The anticipation. The small arguments. The shared beginning of something simple. And when that disappeared, Friday nights were never quite the same again. Number 3, Littlewoods. Before online shopping, there was waiting. And somehow, that made it more exciting. There was a time when shopping didn't arrive instantly. It came slowly, deliberately, and often, through the letterbox. For many families across Britain, that moment meant one thing: the arrival of a Littlewoods catalogue. It didn't look like much at first. Just a thick book. Pages filled with clothes, toys, appliances, ordinary things, printed in neat rows. But once it was opened, it became something else entirely. You didn't rush through it. You sat with it. You flipped each page carefully. You paused on things you liked and imagined what it would be like to have them. Sometimes you'd circle items. Sometimes you'd fold the corners. Sometimes you'd go back to the same page again and again, as if it might change. And the waiting, that was part of it too. Waiting to choose. Waiting to order. Waiting for it to arrive. Days passed. Sometimes weeks. But instead of frustration, there was anticipation. Because the longer you waited, the more it meant. It wasn't just about buying something. It was about imagining it first. About building a small sense of excitement long before anything actually arrived. But like so many things, that feeling didn't survive. Shopping became faster. Simpler. Instant. Catalogues grew thinner, then disappeared altogether. And brands like Littlewoods slowly faded into the background, replaced by screens, clicks, and next-day delivery. Now, everything is immediate. You see it, you click, it arrives. But something is missing. Because what we lost wasn't just the catalogue. It was the waiting. The imagining. The quiet excitement that built over time. And maybe that's why it felt different. Because when everything takes time, it means more when it finally arrives. Number 4, radio rentals. There was a time when the television wasn't something you owned, it was something you shared. Before flat screens and streaming apps, before every room had its own device, the TV was a centerpiece. Not just of the living room, but of family life itself. And for many households across Britain, that experience began with radio rentals. You didn't go out and buy a television outright. Instead, you rented it. Week by week. Month by month. It was practical, affordable, and somehow, it made the television feel even more valuable. Because it wasn't just an object. It was an event. Evenings would quietly fall into place around it. Chairs angled just right. Lights dimmed. Conversation softened as the screen flickered to life. People didn't own televisions, they shared them. And in doing so, they shared moments. Programs weren't watched alone. They were experienced together. Laughter echoed across the room. Silence fell at the same time. Everyone reacting, together, in real time. There was no pause button. No replay. If you missed it, you missed it. And that made every moment feel just a little more important. But like so many things from that era, it didn't last. Technology moved forward. Prices dropped. Ownership replaced renting. Televisions became cheaper, smaller, more personal. And gradually, the need for companies like radio rentals began to fade. Not with a sudden end, but with a quiet disappearance. Fewer families renting. Fewer evenings gathered. Fewer shared moments around a single screen. Until eventually, the model that once brought people together simply slipped away. Now, screens are everywhere. In every room. In every hand. But something changed. Because what we lost wasn't just the idea of renting a television. It was the experience of sharing one. And maybe that's why those moments feel so distant now. Number 5. Granada Television. There was a time when the whole country watched, together. Not at different times. Not on different screens. But in the same moment, shared, simultaneous, and strangely unifying. For millions across Britain, that feeling lived through Granada Television. Television wasn't just background noise. It was an event. Something you planned your evening around. Something you talked about the next day because everyone else had seen it too. Everyone watched the same thing at the same time. And that created something rare. A shared cultural moment. A joke that everyone understood. A scene that everyone remembered. A storyline that lived beyond the screen, into conversations, into schools, into everyday life. You weren't just watching a program. You were part of something bigger. There was no watch later. No skipping ahead. No watching alone in isolation. If it aired at 7 p.m., you were there at 7 p.m. And if you missed it, you missed the moment everyone else experienced. That limitation didn't feel restrictive. It made it meaningful. But slowly, that world began to change. Broadcasting evolved. Networks merged. Identities blurred. And brands like Granada Television, once distinct, once deeply tied to regional identity, began to disappear into something larger, more uniform, and less personal. There was no clear ending. No final broadcast that marked the moment. Just a gradual fading. A name that appeared less often. A presence that felt less defined. Until eventually, it was gone. And with it, something else disappeared too. Because what we lost wasn't just a television brand. It was the feeling of watching together. Of knowing that, at that exact moment, millions of others were seeing what you were seeing. Now, we can watch anything, anytime. But we rarely watch it the same way. Number 6. Fine fare. Even the ordinary felt different back then. Not every childhood memory comes from something exciting. Sometimes, the moments that stay with us the longest are the simplest ones of all. Like walking through supermarket aisles beside your parents. Like sitting in the trolley. Like quietly asking if you could have a treat before reaching the checkout. For many families across Britain, those small moments happened inside fine fare. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't designed to impress. But that was never the point. Places like this became part of everyday life in a way people rarely noticed at the time. Weekly shopping trips had their own rhythm. The same route through the aisles. The same familiar packaging on the shelves. The same small routines repeated over and over until they quietly became memories. And somehow, those ordinary moments carried warmth. Children wandering slightly ahead. Parents comparing prices. The sound of trolley wheels against the floor. Tiny details that once felt forgettable, but now feel strangely important. Because back then, even simple errands felt slower. People took their time. They spoke more. They noticed things. And maybe that's why places like fine fare still linger in people's memories, not because they were extraordinary, but because they were woven into normal life. But normal life changed. Bigger chains arrived. Shopping habits evolved. Convenience became the priority, and older supermarkets slowly disappeared from the high street landscape. Eventually, fine fare faded away completely. And most people probably didn't notice the exact moment it happened. Because places tied to routine rarely leave dramatically. They simply stop being there one day. And years later, you realize you missed them, not for what they sold, but for the version of life that existed around them. A quieter life. A slower life. A life where even the ordinary felt like it mattered. Number 7, Toys R Us. This wasn't a shop, it was a destination. Long before you even arrived, the excitement had already begun. The car journey felt longer somehow. Every road sign made anticipation grow. And then suddenly, you saw it. The giant building. The bright colours. The promise of something magical waiting inside. For children across Britain, walking into Toys R Us felt less like entering a store, and more like stepping into a dream. Everything seemed bigger there. The shelves stretched endlessly above you. Rows of toys, games, bikes, action figures, things you'd only seen on television or circled in catalogues suddenly standing right in front of you. And for a child, that feeling was overwhelming in the best possible way. You didn't rush through a place like this. You wandered slowly, aisle by aisle, imagining entire worlds in your head. You picked things up. Pressed buttons. Tested sounds. Sometimes you left with something small. Sometimes with nothing at all. But it didn't matter. Because half the excitement came from simply being there. Birthdays felt connected to it. Christmas felt connected to it. Even the idea of growing up somehow passed through those aisles. It wasn't just about toys. It was about possibility. But eventually, even places like this began to disappear. Online shopping changed everything. Convenience replaced experience. Toys became something you searched for instead of something you discovered. And slowly, stores like Toys R Us faded away. The lights went out. The aisles emptied. The giant spaces that once felt full of excitement suddenly became silent. And perhaps that's what people miss most. Not just the toys themselves, but the feeling of walking into a place designed entirely for imagination. Because now, children can see almost anything instantly on a screen. But for one generation, wonder once lived in aisles. Number 8. Dixons. Before technology became ordinary, it felt like magic. There was a time when seeing a new gadget for the first time could stop you in your tracks. A new television. A cassette player. A camcorder. Things that now seem simple once felt futuristic, almost impossible. And for many people across Britain, that feeling lived inside Dixons. Walking into a Dixons store felt different from walking into most shops. The lights seemed brighter. The sounds were sharper. Everywhere you looked, there was something new blinking, glowing, spinning, or playing music. You didn't fully understand how any of it worked. That was part of the wonder. Children stood staring at screens for too long. Adults gathered around demonstrations, amazed by features that today would feel completely normal. And every few years, something arrived that seemed to change the future overnight. A smaller radio. A sharper TV. A machine that could suddenly play games at home. Technology wasn't invisible back then. You noticed it arriving. And places like Dixons became the place where people first experienced that future for themselves. You didn't just buy electronics there. You discovered them. But over time, the magic began to fade. Technology moved too quickly. Gadgets became disposable. The excitement of discovery slowly turned into endless upgrades and online comparisons. And eventually, the familiar Dixons name began disappearing from the high street, absorbed into larger retail brands and changing shopping habits. The stores became fewer. The wonder became quieter. Because once technology becomes part of everyday life, it stops feeling extraordinary. And maybe that's what people really miss. Not just the gadgets themselves, but the feeling of seeing something new for the very first time and believing the future was going to be incredible. Because for one generation, the future didn't arrive through a phone screen. It arrived through the doors of a shop like this. Number 9. Bejam. Before convenience became instant, it still felt human. There was a time when frozen food wasn't just about speed or saving time. It felt modern. Practical. Almost exciting in its own quiet way. And for many British families, that world was tied to Bejam. The shops themselves were never flashy. No dramatic displays. No luxury branding. Just freezers humming softly, glass lids sliding open, and rows of neatly stacked food waiting inside. But places like this mattered more than people realized. Because they reflected a changing Britain. Families were busier. Life was moving faster. And suddenly, the idea of having meals ready in the freezer felt like a glimpse into the future. Fish fingers. Frozen peas. Ice cream for weekends. Small things that quietly became part of everyday family life. Children would peer through the frosted glass, choosing desserts. Parents filled baskets with practical meals for the week ahead. And somehow, even these ordinary routines carried a strange kind of comfort. Because convenience back then still felt personal. People still took their time. They still chatted at the checkout. The experience still belonged to the high street, not a delivery van arriving at your door. But eventually, even that world changed. Retail chains merged. Shopping habits evolved. And in the 1980s, Bejam disappeared after being taken over by Iceland. The name vanished quietly, almost unnoticed by younger generations. But for many people who remember it, Bejam represented something larger than frozen food. It represented an era when family life felt simpler. When convenience didn't mean isolation. When small routines still brought people together. When even a quick shopping trip could become part of a memory. Now, modern life is faster than ever. But perhaps that's why people look back on places like this with such warmth. Because sometimes, what we miss most are the ordinary moments we once thought would last forever. Number 10. British Home Stores. You didn't rush through these places, you lived in them. There was a time when department stores weren't simply somewhere you visited for a quick purchase. They were part of the rhythm of family life. Entire afternoons could disappear inside them without anyone really noticing. And for generations across Britain, that place was British Home Stores. It wasn't glamorous in the way luxury stores were. It didn't need to be. Because BHS felt familiar. Comfortable. Reliable. You went there with parents. With grandparents. Sometimes just to browse. Sometimes because someone needed school clothes, curtains, kitchenware, or simply because it was Saturday and that's what families did. You didn't rush through these places, you lived in them. Children wandered between departments. Parents stopped to look at things they didn't necessarily need. There was no urgency to leave. Shopping wasn't about efficiency, it was about spending time together. And over the years, BHS became stitched into ordinary British life so deeply that people assumed it would always be there. But slowly, the world outside changed. Online shopping grew. High streets struggled. Large department stores began to feel outdated in a world built around speed and convenience. And in 2016, British Home Stores collapsed. For many people, the news felt oddly personal. Not because they still shopped there every week, but because losing BHS felt like losing part of a routine that had quietly existed for decades. And maybe that's why its disappearance still feels emotional to so many. Because what vanished wasn't just a department store. A time when people lingered. A time when being together didn't need a reason. And when places like this disappeared, something about Britain disappeared with them. Maybe that's why these places still stay with us. Not because they were perfect. Not because life was easier. But because they belonged to a version of Britain that felt slower, warmer, and somehow more connected. Today, most of these places are gone. Replaced by websites, apps, and faster ways of doing things. But somewhere in the minds of millions of people, they still exist exactly as they were. And perhaps they always will be. So now, I want to ask you something. Which one do you remember?